Till now we saw how aggressive nationalism led to the First World War. But that is not the only cause of the First World War. Now we have seen how colonies were involved in the First World War and how even they were impacted by it. So imperialism itself was a cause of the First World War. But wait a second, isn't the act of acquiring colonies known as colonization? Well, while colonization might refer to the physical act of acquiring colonies, imperialism is a system where a large, powerful nation dominates and exploits smaller nations, which we know as colonies. So, a difference is whereas colonialism is a practice, just like you studying history, imperialism is the idea behind the practice. Like, why do we study history? To learn the mistakes of the past and never to repeat them. So this is imperialism. Now, the imperial country or the colonial country and its colonies together constitute the empire. Empire, imperial. That's how the word originates. Now, these European countries, they were acquiring more and more colonies and they were fighting amongst each other. They were almost running a race. A race of what, if you might ask? The race to have the most number of colonies. So they were involved in a race of acquiring the maximum number of colonies, and this competition made them fiercely aggressive towards each other. So why were the colonies important to these powers, and why were they fighting so hard to gain more colonies and to strengthen the existing ones? Well, colonies are both sources of natural and human resources. So colonies were meant to be exploited by the imperial power to gain their resources such as metals, other timber and other forms of materials, and also labor and other important source of human resources such as soldiers. So colonies were therefore important to these imperial powers, and they were also the markets of the imperial powers. They were also selling their finished goods made in their factories in these imperial markets. Therefore, this imperialism is known as economic imperialism for this reason itself, because the entire objective of gaining colonies and this entire imperial system was nothing but an economic system of exploitation and gaining resources from a smaller, less powerful country. So as unfair as economic imperialism might have been, let us understand how does economic imperialism, which is a economic phenomenon, how did this lead to the First World War? Let us look at these reasons now. First of all, we all know that the industrialization of these European nations and the industrial revolution in these countries led to a great demand for raw materials. Now, industrial revolution and industrialization happened almost simultaneously in all the European countries, which meant that every country felt the need for raw materials almost at the same time. Now, when they felt the need for raw materials, they automatically shifted their focus to these less powerful countries, which they then went on to colonize. But when they were colonizing these nations, they were also fighting amongst each other. Who will get the best colonies? Who would be able to bring the most amount of the world under their colonial shadows? So even colonization was leading to a colonial race where they were in conflict and competition with each other. So Russia, Holland, Britain, Germany and France, not only were they going and colonizing smaller nations, also fighting amongst each other to get the best colonies. Now this race for colonies further became intense when a new player joined the race. So Germany as a nation was established in 1871. Before this, a united Germany did not exist. So when this nation started existing in 1871, automatically it joined the imperial race. Now this however, threatened the other European nations. Why is that? Because Britain and France and the other European nations already were existing imperial powers. So, a new power joining the race automatically makes it more competitive for them. But Germany, like any player who joins a race late, was trying its best to catch up. Now, why was Germany colonizing all of a sudden? Why did Germany's imperial interest suddenly increase? Well, Germany, right after its establishment, under its leader Kaiser Wilhelm II, grew to be an aggressive colonial power because Germany was facing internal problems. Germany was having economic issues. It had a population problem as the population of Germany grew to be more than the land could possibly support. So, back in that time, no matter what problem a European nation had, it only had one solution, which is to get more and more colonies by expanding your imperial power. Which is why Kaiser Wilhelm II, the emperor or the Kaiser of Germany, he made Germany into an aggressive colonial power. Now, can you answer this question? The leader of Germany who led Germany into the race of imperialism was it Kaiser Wilhelm II? Was it King George IV? Was it President Woodrow Wilson? Or was it Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau? The correct answer is Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was the Emperor of Germany at this time. So, as Germany entered the imperial race, this led to a problem. This made the race for acquiring colonies even more aggressive and fierce. Why? Because there was a shortage of colonies. After all, there are only that many number of nations in the world. So if another power joins the imperial race to get new colonies, automatically the existing powers would be threatened and they would become more aggressive towards each other. So there was a demand and supply imbalance. The demand for colonies and the supply of colonies was no longer matching anymore. And this made the competitors turn into fierce rivals because after all, they thought that Germany is coming for their colonies, or if not that, Germany is coming extremely close to their existing interests. Now let us witness the entry of Germany into a race for colonies. So over here you will see that England and France are shown in, England is shown in this color and France is shown in blue. So wherever you see these colors you can see England and France. Whereas Germany is shown in a darker shade of red. So Germany as a country exists over here and Germany's colonies exist over here and maybe some over here. So Germany upon its establishment was not that firmly into the race for colonies, but this changes right before the First World War. So by 1914, we can see that Germany's hold over the world had increased by having colonies in East Africa, in West Africa. So Germany slowly and slowly was expanding its imperial shadows, and this was not tolerated by the other European nations such as Britain and France, who already, as you can see, have their own imperial interests throughout the world. So let us now see what imperial rivalries existed in that time between different European nations as we see over here, to better understand how the race for colonies led to a world war. So first off, we are going to start looking at the imperial rivalries between Britain and Germany. So where are they fighting? So they are fighting for the colonies or for the hold of colonies in Africa. So the entirety of the continent of Africa is a place where Germany and Britain are in conflict with each other. Moving on, we see the rivalry between Britain and France. They are fighting for the colonies of Egypt, which is over here, and Iran, which is over here. So they're fighting for these two key territories to increase their imperial shadows. Then we have the rivalry between Germany and France. They're fighting for Morocco, which is over here, and the remaining of West Africa and the other colonies which reside over here. Then we see the great game between Britain and Russia. So Russia as a country is pretty big, as you can see, and it has its borders with almost all nations in North Asia. What happens is Britain's key imperial possession happened to be India. And they were scared that Russia would invade into India. So they wanted to have control over Afghanistan and Iran, the territory lying between Russia and India, which is British India. But Russia also had the same thought in their mind, and therefore they fought something called the Great Game, which was a power struggle to gain control over Afghanistan and Iran. So what are we seeing? We are seeing that the entirety of the world is nothing less than a battleground where European powers come, fight their battles in, and leave. The people of Asia and Africa have no relevance over here. Their land is the only thing that matters. Finally, we will see the rivalry between Austria-Hungary and Russia. Austria-Hungary is over here, and Russia, of course, is over here. Now, this conflict was regarding the Balkan regions, which is over here. So the Balkan region eventually goes on to become the determinant which causes the First World War. So therefore, even this colonial rivalry is extremely important for the First World War. So now if we put all these rivalries and all these colonies together, this is the map of the world as per the colonies of the European powers. And you can see the entire world is divided. It's because if you look at Europe itself, Europe is just this much. And out of which only this part is Europe, and the remaining is Asian Russia. So the European powers are only in this part of the world. But look at their expanse. They are spread all over the world. So Britain is spread in India, in Eastern Africa, in Canada. And then France is spread in Western Africa. It's also in Indonesia. And so are the other countries. So this entire concept of imperial control was making the world a much smaller place. So when a war broke out, it was easier for the war to spread as almost the entire world was one connected unit. So look at this satirical poster over here. What do you think this poster is trying to tell you? So in this we see three people with grab bags. This is supposed to represent Germany with the helmet, of course. This is supposed to represent Britain with the top hat. And this is supposed to represent Russia with the Russian helmet. So what do you think is happening over here? They are simply taking whatever colonies they can and putting it in their grab bags as if it's for sale or it's for them to take. So over here, again, we can understand one thing very clearly. First, that these powers were continuously in contest with each other to get the best colonies. And second, that the people living in the colonies were of no significance to these powers. Finally, let's look at this other poster where we see that the powers of the world are slicing the world up for them to take. After all, what is imperialism? Imperialism is fueled by the need for resources. And the resources of the world was theirs to take. That is what the European powers believed. So they thought whoever comes to these Colonies, the first, gets to take all resources. But don't you think the resources belong to the people of the colonies itself? So as you can see in the picture, we can see Britain and France fighting amongst each other to get the better slice of the world. Who gets the better colonies? Who gets the better resources? So what did we see till now? We saw the concept of imperialism is distinct from the concept of colonialism, and how imperialism and economic imperialism itself is causing the First World War. How these European powers are fighting amongst each other, and by doing that, they are causing a fierce competition to exist for the race for colonies. And when a new power emerges, which is Germany, and when Germany enters the race for colonies, this already fiercely competitive race becomes almost unbearable, and it tips over and leads to the world fighting a war with each other. And we also saw how colonies and the people living in the colonies were not treated as humans really, and were treated more as subjugants who only exist to fulfill the needs of the imperial powers. So that is how economic imperialism is causing the First World War. In the next lesson, we will look at the other reasons or causes for the First World War.